I am an Uber driver, and I have been in this business for several years now. The night shift is my choice, and there are reasons for that. Darkness hides faces, reveals people's true motives, and most importantly, gives me the freedom to be who I really am. The night streets have their own unique charm, remoteness, desolation, and a constant atmosphere of something unpredictable. This time, the night promised to be calm. I was habitually driving around the city, picking up a few clients, standard stories, standard routes. Everyone seemed too preoccupied with their own thoughts to notice my cold gaze in the rearview mirror. But everything changed when my phone emitted a quiet yet persistent notification for a new request. The location? The old cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Something about this place had always unnerved me. Maybe it was its gloomy appearance, or perhaps the memories of how often I ended up there not with clients, but for my own reasons. There was something about that cemetery that simultaneously filled me with unease and sinister satisfaction. I slowed down and stopped the car at the location specified in the app. The streetlights along the road were dim, their faint glow barely piercing through the thick fog. Around me was an eerie silence that seemed to seep into my very thoughts. This part of the city had always made me uneasy, but tonight, the feeling was stronger. There was something almost tangible about this silence. If I could describe it, I'd say it wrapped around me like a suffocating embrace, making it hard to breathe. I sent a brief message to the client, "I'm here." Then I waited. A minute passed, then another. My fingers began nervously drumming on the steering wheel. There was no response, and I started to think it might be another prank or someone who had changed their mind. My patience was wearing thin when I heard a distinct sound. The door behind me opened and closed with a quiet but unmistakable click. This wasn't the wind. Someone had gotten into the back seat. I glanced at the rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat. The seat was empty. Completely empty. But there was no mistaking it. I had definitely heard the door open and shut. The air in the car grew heavy, and a chill ran down my spine. Forcing myself to smile, though no one could see it, I muttered jokingly, "Ha, very funny." But deep down, I was already searching for an explanation for this unexplainable occurrence. I tried to force myself to calm down. Probably just the wind, I thought, though I didn't believe my own words. Maybe I'm just tired, and it's all in my head. But the cold sweat on my palms and the heaviness in my chest told a different story. Every second that passed in this tense waiting felt like an eternity. And then I heard it. A whisper. Barely audible, low, raspy. It seemed to come from directly behind me, as if someone was leaning close to my ear, but at the same time, the voice was everywhere. The words were lost in the hissing sound. I couldn't make out what was being said. My blood froze in my veins. My heart started pounding so loudly that I could hear nothing else over its relentless thudding. I quickly glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The darkness seemed denser, swallowing any hint of movement. I clenched my teeth and decided to ignore it. Just drive forward, I told myself, trying to suppress the rising panic in my throat. My hand reached for the gear shift, but that's when I noticed the message on my phone. The screen glowed brightly in the darkness, displaying words that made me freeze. "I'm here. Don't look back." My breathing faltered. The message had just arrived. Someone was in the car. But who? And most importantly, why was I being told not to look back? Goosebumps covered my skin as I realized I didn't even want to know the answer. My heart was pounding so hard that the sound of its beats seemed louder than everything around me. Every cell in my body was trembling, and my lungs refused to take a full breath. I gripped my phone tightly and, with trembling fingers, typed a short message. "Where are you? Who are you?" My thumb hovered over the send button, but I finally pressed it. The screen showed, delivered, but no reply came. Seconds felt like hours. The message remained unread. Cold sweat ran down my spine, making me feel as though I were trapped, with no way to escape. Meanwhile, the whispering from the back seat began to change. It grew louder, clearer, yet still unintelligible. Now it sounded like several voices overlapping, as though a chorus of ghosts was trying to speak all at once, saying words I couldn't understand. I started nervously swallowing, trying to calm myself. It's just your imagination, I told myself. You're just imagining things. And then I felt it. A light touch. Cold as ice, it brushed against my shoulder. Like a hand, or maybe something else. The sensation was so real that I nearly let go of the steering wheel. My body tensed, and a scream froze in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to look back. My one rule in that moment was simple: don't look back. I clenched my teeth, trying to steady myself. It's nothing, I muttered almost under my breath. There's nothing there. Just keep driving. You'll be fine. And though every part of me wanted to flee at full speed, I cautiously pressed on the gas pedal, keeping my eyes firmly fixed on the road ahead. It was the only place I could find even a sliver of reassurance. My phone chimed again, a new request from a client. They were nearby, just a few blocks away. Of course, I hesitated. The best decision seemed to be to simply turn off the app, drive home, and forget this nightmare of a night. But instinct compelled me to press accept. Maybe taking on a new client would help ground me in reality, and distract me from all this nonsense. I drove to the pickup point, trying not to think about the message, the whispers, or that icy touch. The streets seemed quieter than usual, and the streetlights emitted a strange, pale glow. Finally, I spotted a figure waiting by the curb. It was a man in a gray coat, holding a briefcase. He quickly got into the car, greeted me, and gave me an address. I exhaled in relief. Everything felt normal again. He was a typical passenger, slightly tired, slightly preoccupied. But everything changed in an instant. The man glanced back, as if something had caught his attention. He froze, and his face took on an expression of confusion that quickly turned to alarm. "Who's that?" he asked. His voice was hesitant, almost a whisper. It was as if I'd been doused with icy water. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my hands on the steering wheel turned cold as stone. I forced myself to respond, though my throat was dry. "What do you mean?" The man looked at me, then back again, and said quietly, "There's someone sitting behind me." My fingers involuntarily gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I felt fear creeping into me like poison, filling every corner of my being. Turning around was the only thing I wanted to do, and yet it was the worst idea I could imagine. "Don't look back," I repeated to myself over and over, but those words no longer brought any comfort. I could no longer bear the tension. My body seemed to succumb to another force, compelling me to turn around. I whipped my head back, expecting to see something. But the seat was as empty as before. No shadows, no figures. Just an empty space. I stared at the back seat for a long moment, trying to convince myself that it was all in my imagination. But the passenger wasn't convinced. "If this is a joke, it's not funny at all," he muttered, his voice quiet but tinged with irritation and fear. His gaze remained fixed on the back of the car as if he could see something I couldn't. I took a deep breath and forced a calm expression onto my face, even though everything inside me was screaming. "Listen, maybe you just imagined it," I said as evenly as possible, though my voice betrayed a trace of uncertainty. "Maybe it's just the light. You know, streetlights sometimes cast strange shadows." The passenger didn't respond. His tense silence was worse than any words he could have said. I pressed the gas pedal and slowly drove on, trying to suppress the growing dread. "It's fine," I told myself. "Everything's fine now." But as soon as the car started moving, I heard it. A barely audible sound coming from behind me. It was breathing. Quiet but heavy, ominous. No matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, this breathing was too real to be a figment of my imagination. It didn't stop. It was there, behind me, right at my back. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, and goosebumps spread across my skin. My pulse quickened again, and one thought pounded in my head: what the hell is going on? But I didn't dare look back again. I just kept my eyes on the road and held onto the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Suddenly, everything went wrong. First, the headlights flickered twice, as if momentarily losing power. Then the engine began to sputter, making strange, jerky noises before cutting out completely. The car froze in the middle of the road, as though someone had slammed the brakes, even though I hadn't. Outside, an impenetrable darkness loomed, with the dim glow of my phone screen as the only source of light. The passenger reacted immediately. His face, already tense with irritation, tightened even more. He shot me an angry glare and almost shouted, "I don't like this. Let me out now." I wanted to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Panic was taking hold of me. Instead, I reached for the door handle to open it and let the passenger out. But the doors wouldn't budge. None of them. I tried again, pressing the central lock button, then yanked the handle sharply, but nothing changed. Neither the front doors nor the rear ones would open. It was as if someone outside was holding the car shut, refusing to let it open. The passenger began frantically tugging at his door handle, trying to force it open on his side. "What's going on?" he shouted, his voice now devoid of anger, replaced entirely by panic. His eyes darted around the car, searching for an escape. "Let me out, now!" I tried to stay calm, but it was impossible. The car didn't just feel locked, it felt restrained, as if some unseen force was holding it in place. Even the metallic frame groaned slightly, as though under pressure from the outside. There were no rational explanations left. This wasn't a technical glitch, nor was it a coincidence. Something, or someone, was clearly playing a dangerous game with me. I finally said, my voice trembling. I couldn't bring myself to look at the passenger, afraid to meet his terrified gaze. "The doors won't open." And then I heard it again, the heavy breathing. It was louder now, more distinct. It seemed to fill the entire car, like the relentless ticking of an old clock striking midnight. The breathing was close. Too close. My hand involuntarily reached for the rearview mirror again. I had promised myself not to look, but the urge was stronger than my resolve. And when I glanced at it this time, I saw something that made me hold my breath. A shadow. A dark, indistinct silhouette barely shifting, like ripples in dense fog. It was sitting right behind me, in the same spot that had been empty moments ago. This was no mistake. The shadow was there. I could only see it from the corner of my eye, because whenever I tried to focus directly, it grew less distinct, as if deliberately evading direct sight. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. The passenger noticed something too. His scream pierced the car. "What is that? Who's sitting there?" His voice trembled, almost hoarse with fear. He flailed, trying to push himself as far away from the back seat as possible, but in the confined space of the car, it was futile. His panic only amplified my own. I turned sharply to see it with my own eyes, but nothing. The seat was empty again. No shadows, no outlines, just the still darkness. I blinked several times, unwilling to believe I could imagine something so vivid, so real. But the passenger's face was pale, his body shaking, his hands gripping the seatbelt with a vice-like grip. "What are you doing?" he yelled. "I saw it. It was there. You saw it too, didn't you? Don't tell me you didn't see it." His eyes were wide, as if staring at some unseen threat. I don't know," I stammered, trying to find words, my voice sounding muted and uncertain, as if it didn't belong to me. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just my imagination. Something was here, in this car, with us. And it wasn't going to simply disappear. Suddenly, without any warning, the engine roared to life on its own. I hadn't touched the keys or pressed any buttons. I simply heard the low growl of the motor, bringing the car back to life. It made no sense, but there was no time to think. All I wanted was to get out of there. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and the car surged forward, tires screeching and leaving marks on the asphalt. The passenger in the back seat was still trembling, practically pressed against the door. His lips moved incessantly, and at first, I thought he was mumbling something. But as I listened closer, I realized he was praying. The words spilled out rapidly, as if he were pleading with something or someone to protect him. The sound added another layer of tension, mixing with the engine's hum and the tires' hiss against the road. I drove as fast as I could, ignoring traffic lights and signs. The only thing that mattered was finding a populated place where I could stop. Finally, I spotted a gas station ahead, illuminated by bright lights that looked like a beacon in a storm. I pulled into the lot and slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a jarring stop. The passenger unbuckled his seatbelt immediately and bolted out of the car, nearly collapsing onto the asphalt. He didn't say a word, just hurried away, putting as much distance between himself and the car as possible. His hands were still shaking, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting something to follow him. I stepped out of the car as well, feeling my legs almost give out beneath me. The cold night air stung my face, but it did nothing to calm me down. Something still felt wrong. It was too quiet. I walked around the car, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I leaned down to peer inside through the window. That's when I saw it. On the fogged-up glass of the rear window, there was a clear handprint. It was large, too large for any human, and the fingers were unnaturally long, as if whatever had made it was never meant to resemble anything human. The print looked fresh, the damp trails glistening under the gas station's lights. A chilling cold spread through my chest. This wasn't an illusion or a trick of the light. Something had been sitting in the back seat, and it had left its mark. When I finally got home, the clock showed well past midnight. I was exhausted, but the fear wouldn't let me even think about sleep. I made one decision: never again would I drive that route. Let this be a lesson for life. I should have known that the night never offers peace to those seeking easy money. It always takes something in return. But as it turned out, the night wasn't over yet. Lying in bed, I was on the verge of falling asleep when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I saw the new message. It was short, but it pierced me to my core: "You can't escape anymore." I flung the phone away like it was poisoned. My mind searched for an explanation but found nothing rational. I decided to act decisively. I deleted the Uber app and erased all data that might remind me of this job. Quitting was my only option. I could no longer sit behind the wheel without feeling fear slowly consuming me. But even now, after leaving the job behind, it hasn't left me. Sometimes, when I start the car, something makes me feel a presence. It's not physical, but it's so real that I can almost hear someone breathing heavily behind me. And no matter how strong the urge to turn around, I never do. I never look in the rearview mirror. Not anymore. Because I know that if I do, I'll see something I can never unsee.